Hey everyone, welcome to Judging for the Win. I'm Dave, and this is my daily ruling. Today's question comes to us from a viewer. Thanks to George L. Hage for this one. Can you stop the game loss from Alchemist's Gambit by using an overcharged amalgam? Alright, so this is the sort of question that I see a fair amount of. And as a judge, I would say that this is a question that's pretty easy, but not necessarily obvious. So let me explain exactly what I mean there. Pretty much any judge I would expect to be able to confidently answer this question, because knowing how to identify a triggered ability or an activated ability are things that a judge would have to do as part of their training and rules knowledge. Now, on the other hand, I would say that a lot of players have only a really vague idea of what those terms specifically mean, and that's because it's not really necessary to know exactly what a triggered or activated ability is to play a game. Rather, if you asked a player who had this card in their deck, they would probably be able to tell you a handful of the most popular cards that this would be able to stop, because those are the only really important activated or triggered abilities that it's important to know about. But if that's the only thing you know, then it's going to be pretty difficult to answer a question like this if it's not one of the examples that you already memorized the answer to. So, with this episode, hopefully everybody is going to be able to understand exactly what a triggered or activated ability is, and exactly whether something is or is not going to qualify as something that could get countered by an overcharged amalgam. Ready? Let's go. Okay, so first of all, what is a spell? And to put it simply, a spell is any card that you're going to play in a game of Magic other than a land. Lands never count as spells, even if they have another card type like artifact or creature that you would normally associate with playing spells. So with that, you could see that when you're playing the Alchemist's Gambit by itself, that would count as a spell. Of course, you probably would not want to counter that, because if you counter a spell, you're countering everything that the spell does, including the part where you would be taking an extra turn. So you would be able to avoid losing the game that way, but it's probably not what you're shooting for. Okay, so with that, what about an activated ability? So an activated ability is really easy to identify. All you have to do is look for the colon. Now, if you don't know what a colon is, it's the thing that I circled on the card image up in the top. So that is a colon, and that is what we're going to be looking for activated abilities. Now, any activated ability is going to have a colon in it. The colon is going to separate the cost, which happens before the colon, from the effects of the activated ability, which happen after the colon. Anything that you see which has a colon is going to be an activated ability, and anything that you see that does not have a colon is not going to count as an activated ability. So as you can see here, the Alchemist's Gambit does not have any activated abilities on it, so the Overcharged Amalgam is not going to help us out on that. Finally, we're going to take a look at triggered abilities. Now, a triggered ability is going to have the same kind of idea as what the activated abilities had. We're not going to look for a colon though, we're going to look for at, when, or whenever. Anytime you see an ability that has one of those three words on it, that means that it's a triggered ability. Anytime you see an ability that does not have any of those three words, then that means it is not going to be a triggered ability. So, as you can see on the Overcharged Amalgam, you do see the word at, indicating that the thing that makes you lose the game is a triggered ability. This is another thing that can be kind of confusing for people, because a lot of the time they're used to only seeing triggered abilities on permanents. So you can imagine something like when this enters the battlefield, or whenever a creature you control dies, or at the beginning of your upkeep. Abilities that are worded like that are all going to be triggered abilities, and you see stuff like that on permanents all the time. But there's no reason why you couldn't see something like that in the text of a spell, or even in the effects of an activated or another triggered ability. So this is going to be an example of that latter case. And those are going to work exactly the same way. Basically, whenever the thing that has it is going to resolve, it's going to set up that triggered ability somewhere out there in the game. And it's going to work from there exactly like any other type of triggered ability would. So it'll work exactly like if there was some imaginary permanent on the battlefield that had that ability, or maybe an imaginary emblem in the command zone that had that triggered ability. Obviously, that's not actually what's going on in the game, but that's a useful way to think about it if it helps it make more sense for you. So, as you can see here, this does in fact have a triggered ability, which means it is going to be possible to wait until the end step where that triggered ability is going to trigger and go on the stack, and then respond to it by exploiting a creature with the amalgam, and you will not lose the game that way. There is a couple of other tricks that I wanted to bring attention to. So, for example, if you have a copy of a spell, an activated ability, or a triggered ability, then that copy is itself going to be a spell, an activated ability, or a triggered ability. So that would mean that if, for example, you were going to twin cast a lightning bolt, what that twin cast is going to do is it's going to generate a copy of the lightning bolt. And the copy of a lightning bolt is going to itself be a spell that you could counter with a counter spell or do anything else that interacts with spells. It'll interact with that copy the exact same way for the most part. Or if you had something like a strionic resonator that you were going to use to copy a triggered ability, then there's actually two different ways you could stop that. You could, for example, use something that counters activated abilities to counter the activated ability that strionic resonator has, or after the strionic resonator's ability has resolved and generated a copy of that triggered ability, you could use something that counters triggered abilities to counter the copy of the triggered ability that the strionic resonator has generated. One last thing that I wanted to point out before I sign off is that a lot of the time you're going to be okay if you just look at the card text to see if it has the colon or the @ whenever. However, that's not going to be foolproof 100% of the time. Generally, with newer cards that are templated with modern templating, you are going to see those important trigger flags whenever you see the actual text on the card. However, sometimes you're going to have to look at the definition of something in the comprehensive rules in order to see where the colon or the @ or whenever is going to be. A lot of the time, if these are going to be part of keyword abilities, for example, the game developers will put those words in the reminder text and you'll be able to see them there. However, sometimes cards do not have reminder text, so the hint that you are going to get is not going to be there. In cases like that, or if you're dealing with older cards where the templating is likely changed over the years, the best practice is to look in the comprehensive rules to see if you can find the @ whenever, or colon in those spots. So here's a couple of challenge questions that you can use to test your understanding. First of all, is tapping a forest going to be something that counts as an activated or triggered ability? And the answer to this one is kind of a trick. If I showed you this forest, then it makes the answer a little bit more obvious because it actually has the ability spelled out with the colon in there. However, if you look at a normal forest that was printed in a normal Magic set, it gets a little bit more hazy. For those cases, we're going to have to take a look at the comprehensive rules, which spells out exactly that there is an ability on that land that says tap, add green to your mana pool. This might be kind of a tricky one for people who are used to playing with Overcharged Amalgam, because you probably know that it's not possible to counter this ability with Overcharged Amalgam. However, the reason for that is that this is a mana ability, and mana abilities cannot be countered. Okay, ready for the next challenge? How about High Tide? What does this have? Okay, so with this one, the actual playing the High Tide itself is going to be casting a spell. So when you tap a blue and you play the High Tide, that's casting a spell. However, what that spell does when it resolves is going to be setting up a triggered ability somewhere in the game land. And it's going to look, anytime someone's going to tap an island for the rest of that turn, there's going to be a triggered ability associated with that adds a mana to your mana pool. Again, this is also a mana ability, which means that you're not going to be able to counter it with an Overcharged Amalgam. But that's how that spell would work. Okay, next example, Cycling. What is this? And so Cycling is actually an activated ability. You can tell because there's a colon in it. You would have to look at the reminder text or in the comprehensive rules to be able to see that colon. However, if you're looking for it and you know that that's what you're looking for, then it makes these questions a piece of cake. Okay, final challenge question. What about Disturb? And so with Disturb, we can see that this one actually counts as casting a spell. If you look at the reminder text or in the comprehensive rules, it doesn't say that there's a colon or a triggered ability keyword. It just says that you're casting that spell. The fact that you're casting it from an unusual zone is kind of weird, but that's not any obstacle to the comprehensive rules. You're still doing the same sort of thing, you're just starting out in a zone that's not the one that you normally would be. Sometimes you have abilities that are like this, however, they're not worded as casting a spell. They're worded as activating an ability or doing something else entirely. And so with those, you're going to have to look at the comprehensive rules and make your own determination. I say this a lot in types of questions that I deal with, and hopefully now, when I say it, you're going to be able to look for exactly the same sort of things that I would and be confident in giving an answer that's the exact same answer I would have given. But that's all I have for you today. How did you do? Join me again tomorrow for another daily ruling, but until then, I hope you have a great day.